Declaration of 76, United States Constitution, a common lawyer comments, clause by clause, Brent Allen Winters, continuing with pages 16 through 22. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Comment. This entire foregoing clause and the clause following form one sentence, reciting 5 self-evident truths, from which the colonists reasoned in arriving at their conclusion to separate from Britain and declare dependence upon God. Each of these 5 self-evident truths listed, truths so well known and attested that no proof need be presented for them, is set off from the one before it by the word that. The way of our common law tradition and scripture is to begin not with legal theory or legislation, but with facts that are beyond dispute. Thus, our declaration begins by affirming the indisputable. Every man's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable. Freedom comprises the drive to pursue happiness. The happenings of the one making all that happen. See Good Book, A Common Lawyer Translates and Annotates, Matthew 5, 3-12, and note accompanying the word blessed. The secret to true staying happiness is liberty. Liberty wells up only from the heart or core of life, called courage. From time out of memory, only the one having given authority, rights, has also the power to take it back. For example, Job, in the depths of his calamity, affirmed the right of God, the giver of all things, to also take away that which he has given. The Lord gave, then the Lord took. The authority of the Lord becomes the most blessed. Job 1:21. So also our declaration here declares that those in government can never separate the individual from his fundamental rights. No man granted these direct God-delegated responsibilities. No man can ever take them away. In short, personhood and rights are inextricably entwined. In fact, any person, whether in government or out, refusing to recognize or otherwise trespassing on another's fundamental right does a personal offense against the Creator who has bestowed that right. Thus, our declaration here recognizes that the Creator has placed within, endowed, each individual, all men, mankind, certain rights of which the individual is inseparable. By considering the names that our declaration uses to describe the God upon whom the signers declare to rely in the last paragraph, one learns the characteristics of their God. For instance, the signers here recognize their God's right over man, man's property, and man's rights, because God is the creator of not only of man, but also of all things, both seen, which is nature, the natural physical world, and unseen, the laws of nature's God, including the God-bestowed rights of authority over creation given to each person. One man's responsibility to exercise these rights of duty back to him. The signers all knew and respected Scripture's teaching that the Creator is the sole author and giver of man's life, Genesis 2:7, and liberty, Isaiah 61, 1-2, and that he has clothed man and his authority over the earth, the land, and all other creatures, Genesis 1:28 and 9:2. 2 continued that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Comment. Our Declaration's splendid defiance, says Churchill, forces all to decide. Being in the common law tradition, it seeks not, as does the civil law tradition, to avenge the past, but to secure the future. Thus, Clause 61 of Magna Carta says that if the powers that be wrong the people, and no remedy remains after all processes have been exhausted, the people may take whatever action necessary to right the breach of their God-delegated rights, without fear of reprisal. Winston Churchill writes, "The underlying idea of sovereignty of the law, long existent in feudal custom, was raised by it into a doctrine for the national state. And when in subsequent ages the state, swollen with its own authority, has attempted to ride roughshod over the rights and liberties of the subject, it is to this doctrine, Magna Carta, that appeal has again and again been made, and never as yet without success." End quote. Indeed, our government uses power, but not every power it uses is a just power. In fact, some powers our government uses are unjust. Just powers are those powers of government to which the governed have consented by giving them to government. Thus, government's exercise of just powers is by the people's authority. Unjust powers are those powers of government to which the governed have never consented by having withheld them from government. Thus, government's exercise of unjust powers is without the people's authority and is therefore abuse of power, which our Declaration calls usurpation. Government without consent of the governed. See Brent Allen Winter's Excellence of the Common Law, section 324, citing government by consent of the governed as far back as a deed signed AD 855. Please know, no government official has any right of power the governed has never given him. Why? Because the governed never can give government a right that no one of the governed could ever have had. Simply put, you cannot impart what you do not possess. For example, a juror must never give government permission to punish a defendant for violating a government command. The juror could never have rightly commanded the defendant if there were no government. Indeed, if a juror could never have had the right to do that which the government wants to do to the defendant, it is impossible that government has that right. Likewise, no legislature, by agreeing together, can conjure up through conspiracy any right to command anything that no one of them or of the governed could have had. In sum, just powers are those that the governed had the right before giving them to government. Unjust powers are those government uses even though the governed never gave permission. In sum, just powers of government are only by consent of the governed. The common law lodges such consent most powerfully in the grand and petit juries. Just powers are those powers the governed could have rightly held and exercised before giving them to government. 2 continued. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Comment. The foregoing clause asserts no right of revolution. To be sure, men have unalienable rights, and when a government violates these rights, the people have the right to alter or abolish that government. Such rights, however, do not necessarily demand violent overthrow of government. Such understanding is false. To bar such a notion, our Declaration sets out the standard of nature's God for those, such as present-day Americans, living under tyranny of government usurpation of power. Long-suffering patience. Our Declaration is no revolutionary manifesto. In fact, neither the word revolution nor language hinting at a call to arms is found in it. To be sure, full-blown war came, but not by the colonists' aggression. The British forced war. Stand your ground. Do not fire unless fired upon. Let the British troops pass by, and do not molest them without they begin first. Captain Parker, Lexington Green, morning of 19 April 1775. For example, by replacing the common law courts with admiralty tribunals, all for the ease of England's central banks, mercantilism, and trading monopolies, Britain removed any requirement for a search warrant and denied trial by jury. Consequently, breaking and entering homes and businesses to seize personal belongings and to arrest those offensive to the central bank's monopolies became widespread. But the admiralty courts, being civil law tribunals and not common law courts, offered no real opportunity to correct government wrongs. Trial by jury was no longer a live option. Consequently, the colonists could only meet force with like force or cower under forced association with the bankers' monopolies. Our Declaration's language reflects the phrases of John Locke, student of John Owen, Puritan in outlook, and thus preoccupied with the Bible, which dominated Locke's mind and writing. No right of revolution being part of Scripture or the common law tradition, John Locke never advocated it. In fact, the English and American revolutions, so-called, were not rebellions against authority or right, i.e. against God, the spring and distributor of all authority, but against abuse of power, in order to secure the future following lessons from the past. Thus, these two wars differ from most all other movements called revolutions, such as civil law's papal, French, and Russian revolutions, which tried to avenge the past, not secure the future. In fact, civil law is the ever-emerging child of fantasy, rebelling against our lessons from past facts. On the contrary, the British Parliament's 17th century war against the king and the British Americans' 18th century war against the king and Parliament followed humble but firm requests, later becoming a demand that king during the English war with the king and the king with Parliament during the American war with king and Parliament remain within God's constitution of authority, as common law requires. The English insisted the British king stop laying claim to rights of power that belonged to God alone. Later, the British Americans insisted that king and parliament stop usurping these same powers. Moreover, these English and American wars against imperial power were both in response against, not extensions of, the Papal Revolution's civil law doctrines that have overtaken most countries and now threaten the United States. Though, as this clause says, people are tolerant, all remain nevertheless duty-bound to arrest government abuse of power once it fulfills the following clause's 4-point standard.